and welcome back to yet another exciting week of the Lazy Money Game. In this week's episode, I will start by giving an update to my portfolio, and afterwards I will look into this question: where do I find inspiration for potential new stocks that I want to add into my portfolio? And the way that I'm going to present this is by looking at a lot of 13F filings which has just come out, meaning the last quarter, what have all the big investors been doing, and I will show and share a webpage where you can find this information. So let's start with a quick portfolio update. The first thing we notice is that there was a green circle for this week's episode, meaning that the portfolio is up in value compared to last week. If we go to the portfolio value tab, you can see that we are up a little more than $2,000, but perhaps more importantly is that the cost has not changed, meaning that I haven't added any additional cash into my portfolio for the last 15 weeks. I know that unfortunately this is perhaps a bit boring to look at, that it's not that often that I'm doing new purchases, so you're like, why aren't you doing anything? Well, the good explanation, as I have explained earlier, is due to the fact that I have to pay a fee, and since I want to reduce the percentages which I'm paying in fees, meaning I'm doing less frequent buying, but instead buying for bigger amounts. You can very clearly see that here in the beginning when I was trading on Revolut here. It is very hard to see the big increases here, but you can see that there was a much more smooth line. But then when I switched my brokers, then my buys started to become much more distant and they were a lot larger. So from a purely egoistic point of view, I would definitely have preferred being able to buy without any fees. That means that I would have continued to buy on a much more frequent basis instead of just once or twice every quarter, since it would give me the opportunity to do a better dollar cost averaging strategy instead of here where I'm trying to navigate and say, I still want to do some sort of dollar cost averaging, but at the same time I realize that I don't want to put my cost too high by buying frequently and having to pay this fee. And I know that this actually makes worse YouTube content simply due to the fact that it is much more interesting to follow what I'm doing if I'm actually doing something and not just sitting and waiting until I have acquired enough capital to lower my cost by buying once or twice a quarter instead of buying once or twice per week. But the third point, perhaps speaking more in favor of doing these less frequent buys, actually goes towards the direction of mimicking more what you are seeing from a true value investor like Warren Buffett, namely that the majority of your time you shouldn't be sitting and buying or selling stocks. As a value investor, the majority of your time is time spent reading, researching, and trying to find your next purchase. And it requires a lot of patience. So it's not hard to understand the strategy, but it is hard to follow since you have to accept the fact that you need to be patient. And if you are bombarded with offers on a daily basis on whether you want to buy or sell and constantly have your hypotheses tested, then it is human nature to act on it instead of simply just sitting and doing nothing. If we then continue to my favorites tab, namely the dividends tab, then we can see that this has been quite a good week since I have received a little more than $170 in dividends, and they came from Agree Realty Corporation and AbbVie. And this means that now I have surpassed the $5,000 mark in year-to-date dividend received. So if we go to the goals tab, that means that I have now finally achieved goal number 35, namely $5,000 in yearly dividends. And of course, I'm pretty pleased with the result of achieving yet another goal towards my financial independence. And this actually makes it goal number 3 that I have achieved this year. Unfortunately, I'm also quite sure that this is the last goal that I'm going to achieve this year, since I'm not going to reach $6,000 in yearly dividend this year or $1,600 in quarterly dividends either. And if we go back to the overview here and scroll all the way to the top, just so you can see how each individual position has been performing within this week. If we then continue to the next topic, namely how to get investment ideas. I mean, besides following my channel and seeing what this small-time investor is doing, well, what do I actually do when I'm searching for ideas to find something? Since there's no shame of being a cloner when it comes to investing. You don't have to come up with the ideas yourself. You can simply just pick out ideas that other people have. So one way of doing this is due to the regulation that you have in the United States, that if you are managing more than 100 million US dollars, then you have to disclose in these Form 13F filings what you have been investing in over the last quarter. So one way to get inspiration is to take a closer look at these filings. And a good place to do that is on this webpage called Dataroma. So if you go to Dataroma, I will of course leave a link in the description below. Then this is the homepage. And just before we dive into what the super investors have actually done in Q3, let me start out by pointing towards the top right corner here, where there's a quote from Warren Buffett. I don't read economic forecasts. I don't read the funny papers. And speaking of Warren Buffett, if we go to Warren Buffett, Berkshire Hathaway, right around the middle here, and if we then click on activity, then they listed pretty clear what he has been buying and selling in Q3 of 2022. And the top 5 holdings here, that is where he have added to holdings that he already have. Then there are 3 complete new holdings. And as you can see here, then he has also exited 6 of his positions. Or rather, he has lowered his position in 5 different holdings and only completely sold out of store capital. I'm a bit surprised to see that he has sold out around 8.2 million shares of Activision Blizzard, since there's no real news regarding whether or not the merger with Microsoft is going to happen. But perhaps the most interesting or surprising buy here is this more than 60 million shares into Taiwan Semiconductors. But it really just confirms his belief on Apple, since Taiwan Semiconductors are the one who is delivering a lot of the material for Apple. At the same time here, we notice that he continues to add shares into Occidental Petroleum and Chevron. So, I mean, he's really believing strongly in energy these days. If we then go back to the overview here, just to see what other big investors has been doing, I'm quite interested in seeing what Michael Burry has been doing, since in Q2 he sold out of all his position except for one, namely Geo Group, a private prison company. So when we look at Michael Burry here for Sycon Asset Management and go to activity, here you can clearly see in Q2 that he sold out of all his positions except for Geo Group, but now he has added an additional 1.5 million shares into this holding, and at the same time he has added 5 new holdings. Unfortunately, these are companies which I do not know too well, but I mean, this just proves my point that this is a good way of getting to know companies, since now at least I have the name, so I could start my research process if I wanted to know more regarding these companies. But I mean, since we are talking about Michael Burry here, I am not trying to mimic him as a long-term dividend growth investor. This is simply not my ballgame. Michael Burry goes long, goes short. Sometimes he holds stocks for a week, sometimes he holds them for a decade. So I mean, this is more since the fact that I'm interested in seeing what he is doing. So if we go back to the homepage here, I know the names perhaps can be a bit hard to read, so let me just try and name a few which I have been talking about earlier on this channel. So we have a guy like Guy Spear from Aquamarine Capital, you have Seth Kleiman from Baupost, you have Li Lu from Himalaya Capital Management, Dan Loeb, the activist investor from Third Point LLC, you have Bill Ackman from Percy Square, you have Carl Icahn from Icahn Capital Management, Howard Marks from Oak Tree Capital, and Momis Pabrai, just to name a few. So as you can see here, this is a wonderful place to find information and find inspiration to learn more. So hopefully you will be able to find some inspiration when you're looking through Dataroma. That was at least my intention, because I think it is an excellent choice to learn more about what the super investors are actually doing. and it is a great place to learn about businesses you didn't even know existed. So that actually sums it up for yet another exciting week of the Lazy Money Game. So if you have enjoyed the content and made it all the way to the end of the video, then please consider leaving a like or subscribe to the channel. It really helps me out a lot. And until I see you next time, bye!